Now I would like to open our second part of the Congress, a big part about present matriarchal societies. But we have a keynote speaker. We have Barbara speaker here. Barbara Mann is from the Beer Clan of Ohio, St. America. She is an authoritative voice of the first people of North America. And I'm very glad that she is here with us, for the Iroquois are the nation which they are already well known for their matriarchal traditions since a very long time. And she will rightly open now our section on present matriarchal societies. Barbara Alice Mann, PhD, lives, teaches, and researches and writes in Ohio, the homeland of her Seneca ancestors for the last 1,500 years. She is the author of George Washington's War on Native America. It appeared in 2005. She's the author of Crying Women, the Ganturisas. It came out 2004, and of Native Americans, Archaeologists, and the Mounds, 2003. She's editor and author of Native American Speakers of the Eastern Woodlands, 2001, and co-editor and main contributor of Encyclopedia of the Haudenosaunee. Oh, I don't know if I pronounced it right. Is it right? Haudenosaunee for Iroquois Confederacy was published in 2000. She has also authored numerous journal articles and book chapters, including Euroforming the Data and A Sign in the Sky in 1997. She is currently a lecturer in the English department at the University of Toledo. Please welcome Barbara Mann.
For my part, I'm continually astounded by the apparently fixed idea of even left-of-center academics that women are, by definition, a powerless group. Theorists propose things like social sabotage, which can only be based on the notion that women are sabotaging a society they had no part in constructing. I was just reading William Laidlaw, and he's proposing that changes to standard language, any deviations from it, originates from the most powerless group, and then immediately start talking about women. Okay? And anytime anybody in the crowd even mentions some high-status women, then the automatic assumption is that you must, of course, be speaking of the ancient and long and safely dead Mesopotamian goddess cultures. At that point, I always start shaking my head and wondering rather sadly how American feminists in particular can have so thoroughly forgotten the inspiration of their own movement, and that inspiration was the Gantuwishes. The Gantuwishes is a mature woman acting in her official capacity in society. Means the sisterhood of the lineage. Okay, and these are very powerful women who boldly led the Iroquois, and by the way, all Eastern cultures had a variation of this, led the cultures politically, economically, socially, and spiritually, by the way. And among the Iroquois, they were more than a little instrumental in creating the constitutional form of government that actually established these rights as a matter of law. Now, the notion of such formal usually startles Europeans and the European descendants, but it's actually an old, very mature idea among the people of the Eastern Woodlands. And by Eastern Woodlands, I mean North America east of the Mississippi River. All nations in the East recognize the very high political, economic, spiritual, and social roles of the clan mother. And let me clarify what a clan mother is. I've seen all kinds of squirrely definitions. A clan mother is a woman who has passed menopause. Okay, you are at that point safe to be around any medicine. You don't qualify as a clan mother just because you got old. You also have to be among the wisest, the quickest, and that's quick this way as, not necessarily so much this way, you can be athletic. But you gotta be quick up here, you gotta be firm, you gotta be smart, and there's no simpering allowed. Okay. Now the women were, and among traditionals, Iroquois traditionals, and actually any traditionals in the East, the women still are the power brokers of their people. But in the 12th century, the Iroquois codified these roles directly into the great and binding law of peace, the Iroquois Constitution. Now, it's axiomatic among Native peoples that no one can possibly understand the fruit of a tree without first understanding the root of that tree. It's only by watching that root come up and mature into a tree that then flowers and produces a fruit that you can begin to understand the medicine of that tree. Okay, so if you want to understand and make that medicine work for you, you've got to start at the root and watch it grow. So, well, there's a whole lot that I could stand up here and talk to you about today. It seemed to me that the most fruitful use that I could make of my time was to tell you about the history of how the Omaha, that's the Iroquois people, created our generous, egalitarian, woman-centered, and by the way, not at all coincidentally, peaceful league. The Constitution of the Iroquois was actually created when it was ratified by all the people, the clans, and all the nations in the year 1140. And Maggie Carter included the boys. The Great Law actually represented a very hard-fought victory for the forces of peace and justice. It settled a massive civil war that had been raging for well over a century. Women generally, and the head clan mother among the women, were absolutely instrumental in bringing this struggle to a close and replacing the war with peace. Variously known in tradition as the Jingwa Shashat, that's her name, and also titled in later generations. She's also called the Great Woman, the Mother of Nations, the Peace Queen. Jingwa Shasha, she was key at every single stage and every step along the way to this very hard-won peace, and also to the creation of the Constitution that followed. So for you to understand the war, the Civil War that led up to the creation of the Constitution and the emplacement of women's power, you have to know something about the cultures that immediately preceded the Iroquois Constitution. Those cultures were the mound builders, whom you may have heard of, centering largely around the river basins, especially the Mississippi and the Ohio River. The Ohio Valley was one of the most central locations for the mound builders all over. You're kind of hard-pressed to find that out today from any of the textbooks. Building culture went back to the year 2450 before the Common Era, which is roughly contemporaneous with ancient Egypt, the inception of ancient Egypt. I don't have time, obviously, to go into the long history of the mound building cultures, bringing us into the 11th century. So I just want to give you a few glimpses of the structure of mound building culture. In the first place, it was led by a ruling elite priesthood that was composed exclusively of elite men. They maintained their power largely through brutality and terror. Terrorism was their modus operandi. In particular, the priests loved to use spiritual terror. Okay, they weren't just brutal, bunk-you-over-the-head barbarians. They also used spiritual terror. And organized religion, by the way, is very famous for doing that. Their organized form of terror was to threaten to cast death on anyone who might dissent from their rule. And by the way, they could. They were perfectly capable of casting death on you because they had hoarded entirely unto themselves all of the medicinal plants and the herbs, and they knew the ways to make a plant that was going to kill you dead. They had many other corrupt behaviors. One of them was that they maintained a very large standing military, and they would call wars often for very capricious reasons, and those wars were very large and costly and destructive. They laid claim to, the priests did, and they hoarded up all of the commodities that were produced by the lower classes, which included largely the women. They were not into sharing, shall we say. They also specialized in kidnapping for the purpose of gang raping any young woman who caught their eye, including little girls. They would keep them as sex slaves until that woman was so battered and broken that she was no longer attractive to them. Okay, these were not nice guys. Around the 9th century, people had noticed this all along, by the way, but as time went on, they only became more and more corrupt. They had absolute power, and this job corrupted them absolutely. About the 9th century, people started saying, we don't like this. And what did the women do in particular? In particular, the women who got fed up with this just stood up and walked away. They just left the culture. Okay. And there are a lot of traditions about the 6 families leaving Ohio, the Mountain cultures. One of them was a Mohawk clan mother. She first led the people up into Quebec, where she found the growing season, unfortunately, not long enough. And so after a number of years there, she stood up and she walked south. And in Native America, if people trust you, they will stand up and follow you. So she stood up, and walking behind her were a lot of people. Some of the people, however, stayed up there. Some of the Mohawks stayed up there north of the St. Lawrence, and they became Laurentians. The Cartier went into in 1534. Now, excuse me, I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat. Now, the Mohawk clan mother was not the only one that led the people away. Another large group got up and walked up into Ontario, Canada. These became what we call the neutral in history. And they immediately established a couple things. One of them was sustainable corn cropping. The cropping that the women had done under the Mountain culture had largely been restricted to gourds of different kinds and melons. This was not because we didn't know, thank you, it's not because we did not know about corn cropping. We did, but the priests refused to allow us to raise corn. That was wonderful, sustainable, use it for eating and sustenance. They saved it solely for themselves for ceremonial purposes. Now the women started going off, the Mohawk women and the Winter women, they went off and they started corn cropping. They got to do this, which was a very much in-your-face thing for them to do their priesthood. And it is no accident that the women up there in Ontario, around the year 800, they were really corn cropping good. They figured out the corn, beans, squash, triumvirate. And they started sending out messengers of peace. And archaeologists to this day can trace the spread of the earliest corn down there from Ontario into New York and into Ohio and western Pennsylvania. And why was this? This was specifically because we sent emissaries of peace to show other people how to do this corn cropping. Now, emissary of peace is an actual office, a position that people have in Eastern Native cultures. An emissary of peace is one who is sent from one group to another group for a totally peaceful purpose of sharing some really important information that has just been discovered. For example, in the year 400, when the Seneca men invented the bow and arrow, that's a whole lot, and they sent messengers of peace out to all of the other Iroquois nations and also their own deep friends and showed them how to make bows and arrows. Those were messengers of peace. Well, Jingoshisha not only sent messengers of peace, she was a messenger of peace. She personally came down to the south to show people how to raise these crops. Now, in order for a messenger of peace to operate, there are some very strict rules. It has to be, the messenger must be sent by a duly constituted authority in the original group. That messenger must have something ephemeral, not some silly little new fashion, but something, a new way to do baskets, a new way to nap flint, something important. And the third requirement is that that person go and actually present themselves to and be welcomed. If they don't want you, you don't go. So what was happening is women were sending women messengers to other women, and they were totally bypassing the priesthood. Obviously, the priesthood was not real happy about this. So the priesthood sent some messengers themselves to the Boissecha in her Cornway camp, and she started being called the Cornway of her, and what she was presenting was the Cornway. So they sent, priests sent their own messengers out there, and those messengers confronted her and said, "Strange woman, who are you, strange woman? Who sent you with this strange message? Who welcomed you?" And they were pretty angry about it. What they did immediately after they sent this messenger, who was actually warning you that they were about to be attacked, took as many of as they could find, bound them up, put them in the middle of the cornfield, and set the cornfield on fire. Now, some of the people escaped, okay, including Jinko Shisha. She escaped. After that, there was a very massive civil war. The priests raised massive war against the Cornway camp. And they would come upon people as often as they could and destroy as many crops and kill as many people as they could. And the women just replanted the crops. Now, there are many traditions about the Jingo Shisha, and some of them include what she looked like. This is interesting to me. I don't know if it's interesting to you. But she would dress from time to time as a warrior. She was forced into that position of war woman. That was not what she was intending to do, but she wound up taking that position. Her body paint was bright green, the color of growing corn. Okay. Her headdress, including a warrior's plume, was made out of bright yellow corn silk. Interesting description. And she also was reputed to have been an expert canoeist. A canoeist that there is an art to canoeing, and especially going fast, knowing the currents and dodging ag-ladders. By the way, we didn't tell the priests how to make ag-ladders. That's all they had. We had bows and arrows. Okay. So the head priest of the Mongol culture, he was also a pretty colorful guy. And there were a number of the main priests that were mentioned, but the main one who was giving everybody the most trouble and was hell on wheels was named Adodoro. This man was very, very scary. He was basically a psychopath in the way he's described. His body was crooked, probably had arthritis. His feet were described as being duck's feet. His penis was so long that he could wrap it around his waist 3 times. Now, you need to know that a bloated penis is kill power. K-I-L-L, kill power. It's kill medicine. And 3 is the standard number of warnings before you make war. So you know, you kind of had it right all there within easy grasp. In addition, he was a member of the snake clan, so he had live poisonous snakes wrapped into his hair. He had long hair and live poisonous snakes wrapped in it, and every time he moved, they'd start writhing around. And, they were very unpleasant snakes, obviously. And on his fingers, he had little finger mittens made of the heads, the hollowed out heads of snakes. So anytime he was talking to you, there were snakes coming out of every pore. So he was a very, very scary guy. And he actually initiated a cannibal cult. What was going on here was an ideological war over subsistence. The women were doing corn cropping, going to a totally different land usage, which entailed a different social organization. The priests had emphasized hunting as the proper way to gain food. Now, cannibalism is an extreme form of that, and by the way, it was a ritualistic thing, and it wasn't like everybody was dining out every night. That was not the case. But that was part of terrorism. You know, you want to scare somebody to death, eat one of their relatives. That's pretty good. All right, now, this scary man was obviously making the war, and I don't have time to tell you the whole tradition of what was going on here, but I need to explain that there was yet another element. In native culture, you cannot have a proper unit unless both elements of the cosmos, male sky and female earth, are together. So it wasn't enough that you had the Jigosha. You also had to have her grandson, the peacemaker. He was also sent down from Ontario by the women to bring another message of peace. And his message of peace was very specifically the structure of the Constitution that would create a peaceful form of government. Now, when he came down, he was just a young man. The Jigosha was obviously the elder of the 2. She was a woman in her maturity, and he was just this little, pimply-faced teenage kid. So, he needed her, she didn't need him. What was his first deed when he came down south of the St. Lawrence, south of Lake Ontario? His very first deed was to go find her. And he approached her corn camp and made his proper introductions and laid out before her his plan for a constitution for peace. And this plan, by the way, was not something he dreamed up, it was given to him, it was something they were already doing up there. Now, what did she do? Did she jump up and scream, "My hero!" and run into his arms? No. she sat there and she had some very hard-nosed negotiations with him. And she said, you want a constitution? You want my lines? Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it my way. And she put several sections. It was the claims and consanguinity sections that she negotiated into the Constitution. And it wasn't until he agreed to put them in there that she agreed to support his peace cause. Now, the sections that she put in, the things she insisted on, included Nagashimanja, which is the sacred will of the people. Okay, that's one of the 3 pillars of the Constitution. The other 2 pillars are Nagario, which are high ethics, and Nishkanoni, which is public health and welfare. The second thing she put in was women as the sole counselors at the grassroots level of government. Women, next power, as the sole keepers of peace and war. Women as the sole keepers of their mother the earth. And women as the sole keepers of lineages and names. Now, taken together, these powers put women in the driver's seat of the new league. And I'll go over some of those powers in a little more detail here after I finish the tradition. The grand finale of the tradition goes into how the priesthood was finally finally ended. It was a very large moment in our history. I want to take a little time to detail this because I think the story would have been, if it had been in Europe, if it had been a European story. If it had been a European story, the story of how the Adodoro, the priesthood, was crushed would have featured a great number of attacks on cities, the number of cities destroyed, the number of fields that were completely leveled, the number of armies, how many casualties, and how many battles it took before the Queen's forces zeroed in there on the King's forces. And then the climax of that European story would have been how the Queen's men went and completely and utterly killed and probably maimed and dismembered and did all kinds of horrible things to the king. Thereafter, to celebrate their deed in song as a righteous action. If later historians ever got around to mentioning the Queen, by the way, they might have pointed out that she was pretty or her 2 laws, but she would pretty much be out of the story. Well, what happened with the European Civil War is that people just started refusing to fight. A number of people had gone to the corn camp. A lot of them had gone to the corn camp, and they were a living example of how you could raise corn, distribute it at nobody's hungry. Folks that were still in the mom camp were looking around and just say, hey! And they just refused. Priests could call as many wars as they wanted, but if people weren't going to go to war, nothing was happening. So what happened is, so many people just walked away from the priests that they didn't have anything but a few little handfuls of loyalists left on their side. So the tide was turned completely against them because they were outside of consensus. Okay. Now, it's very important to understand consensus in Native American culture. There is a circle, and people stand within the circle of consensus, and if you're just this little bit outside the circle just gets wider to include you. But if you're way Agamben over here, that's another story. You're outside consensus, and that is bad news for you. So, Jingoshisha, what she was thinking, Adodoro, he's still this powerful, snaky guy. He's still got his penis wrapped around his waist. And she's thinking, how do I show him how far outside of consensus he is? Well, the priest's territories had slimmed down so much that he was just living on a little island that he had in the center of a large lake. And he had a lot of earth medicine. He had very strong earth medicine. He could call up waves, he could call up tornadoes, he could call up storms, and you couldn't get to his island unless he let you come across the waters. So she decided that she was going to have all the children of the corn camp make their fields totally around this island. They went all the way around the lake and totally surrounded the island so that no matter where he stepped on this island, no matter where he looked, he was looking out at people living in a very wonderful way. And here he is stuck on this stinky little island with some snakes. Okay, after she had made that point, she sent the peacemaker and his pal Hiawatha, and by the way, Hiawatha is probably how you know him. He started out as Adodoro's first lieutenant. He was one of the main functionaries of the priesthood. He came over to the corn camp. So Peacemaker and Hiawatha were sent over to the island because they had a little offer they wanted to make Adodoro. This was Jingoshisha's way of finally ending the priest resistance. And what she decided was, let's make him an offer he can't refuse. She sent those 2 boys over there with the offer of, if you come into our constitutional government, I will make you the first chairman of the league. They finally got over there to the Rose Island, to They finally got over there, and all things considered, realized it was a pretty good deal. And he said yes, and that was it. The idea was bring everybody into your camp. Don't kill people that disagree with the place. It's a collaboration. You can't possibly first know where East is. You cannot know where East is unless you got West, right? And nothing can run in the direction of the sky unless they're both cooperating. If West started saying, you can't, there wouldn't be any direction of the sky. It would be all over the place. The only reason that there is a singular direction of the sky is because East and West cooperate to make that possible. Okay, that's the twinship principle. And the government is set up on the twinship principle. And in this principle, you have a father and a mother side of the league. Okay, so it's replicated governmental structure is what you have, because you've got to have the earth side, the women's side, you've got to have the sky side, the male side. Okay. The women's side was the clan councils, and they met at Gustavus, women, and they had clan mothers in Bush's. Yes, she presided, she was the head chair of that council. The men's council, men's grand council, met at Onondaga, farther east, and they were sitting under the Rowe. He was the chairman. By the way, the chairman and the chairwoman don't have any actual power. All they do is call people together and kind of keep the fire going while the conversation's on. So, this is the father and mother side of the league. The women basically had an initiative power. Government plans exist at the local level, they exist at the national level of government. Now, in Western culture, especially the U.S., the federal government has all power. There's lip service paid to the states, but they actually have no power on the local level. In airport society, women absolutely have the balance of power. Why? The grassroots is a native term, by the way, and it's where the consensus of the people, where the sacred will of the people bubbles up to the surface, and the clan members are trusted with that. All right, now, this had some very important ramifications. In the first place, the women set the agenda of the league. How? Because only women could initiate an issue. The men, that the women had not sent to them. So the men could go to the clan mothers and ask for an issue all they wanted, because the mothers didn't think it was worth discussing. That was just too darn bad. It got tabled. It didn't go anywhere. Okay. Now, clan mothers could actually refuse to have anything brought up that they didn't want to listen to. One of those things included the Gailio, which is a so-called Code of Handsome Lake, very Christianized woman crushing tradition that was started in 1799. It was a replication of the missionary efforts, except that it was done in feathers and blankets. The women hated it. It was a violation of just about every tradition there was, and so the women refused to bring it forward. It was not in the Grand Council until 1848, when every single woman of Handsome Lake, Sagami Gaia's lifespan was dead. Okay, every contemporary of his was dead. And it was also brought forward because the U.S. government got into the act and decided they were going to civilize us and banish the old constitutional forms, and did that by taking power entirely away from women. And Seneca women, because of this 1848 Constitution, not regained the right to vote until 1964. Now, traditionally, however, the women formulated and reformulated all the issues. If they didn't like the way the men treated the issue after it was given to them, all they did was strike it down. They just struck it down. So they had a judicial review of what the men did. The men did not have judicial review of what the women did. And in fact, there's a line in the Constitution that goes out of its way to say men have the same rights as women have, enumerating all of women's power. Now, the right to call war was also a woman's sole right. Okay, and by woman, I mean all the clan mothers together in one good-minded consensus. That's a woman. They retained that. And I need to tell you that European wars were absolutely nothing like, I mean, native wars are nothing like European wars. You know, the total war of the Greeks, just destroy everything that moves and tear it down and salt the earth and all that nonsense. No. This struck us as extremely barbaric, and we wanted nothing to do with it, and it was an echo of the corrupt priesthood that people had spent so much time and energy getting rid of. So what we had instead were martial arts competitions. Okay, and yes, we had martial arts, very similar to what Asian martial arts are today. And in those martial arts competitions, people would go on the field, and by the way, women competed as well. And you'd go out and you would find you somebody who was about your same size, about your same health, and about your same skill level. There was no honor whatsoever in investing some little kid that just started or in taking down a lady. Okay. There was no honor at all in that. We had to compete against somebody your own size. Now, these wars, so-called, included refreshment breaks, lunch. The whole point of it was to get an adopted captive, and we weren't bringing these captives in for slaves, as I've seen Western textbooks try to insist. No, we were not bringing slaves. We were trying to build up a population, if our population was lagging a bit, and we were adopting those people as full citizens. When Europeans first saw our form of warfare, they called it weeping and dancing. I couldn't figure it out. Now, once the Europeans arrived with their proxy wars, their forever wars, and their very lethal weapons, things got a lot more hectic. But women and still decided whether or not there was going to be a war. And when men and women did go to war, there were more women. If they decided along the way to the war that it wasn't a good idea, they just turned around and went home. They didn't have to go. They didn't want to go. They didn't have to. If they got right there on the battlefield and they looked and they said, "This is stupid," they could go home. Okay. And nobody thought the worst of them, except of course the Europeans. Anyway, back to the right to call war. There's another very firm law in the Eastern Woodlands, and it says that women have the absolute right. Women, children, old folks, and anybody who's helpless have the absolute right to peace and security. That's a law. Okay, and so you can't make laws. I have waived that because I think something very important is at hand. Now, there aren't a whole lot of grandmothers meeting together who are willing to send their grandchildren out to be killed. And something needs to be very, very important before the women give the men black wampum. And if the women hand the men black wampum, it's actually very deep purple. That means the men may go and do as they please. But don't assume that just because war was one of the possibilities before them, that was what men were automatically going to do. It was not. I'll give you an example. In 1783, we just fought the horrible American Revolution. And by the way, we won the war in the West. George Washington did not win the war against Native Americans. We won it. And one of the big prizes was Ohio, which the settlers have been trying to take for the last century. Now, 1783, the war is hardly even cold, and George Washington is immediately sending more troops trying to take Ohio. The women are pretty disgusted, and we gave the men black wampum. The men didn't go running off the war. The grandfathers sat in council and said, "What are we going to do about this?" And they said, "Well, let's see if we can't make peace with this George Washington guy." And so between 1784, they went to peace council after peace council after peace council trying to stop this gentleman. And it was only because in 1791, George Washington raised the largest army that America had ever raised to that point and sent it against the people of Ohio that the grandfathers called for a war, which, by the way, they won. It was, proportionally speaking, the worst defeat that America has ever experienced. Now, in the present, women are still calling and stopping wars. How many of you remember the troubles at Oka, Quebec, okay, in 1990, when they were trying to put, of all things, a golf course on sacred land, sacred Mohawk land? Well, no, we didn't do that. So the young people were out there, and some of them were armed. And after they were put down by the settler police, the media really played up the fact that one of the women, one of the clan leaders, was found to have had a cache of weapons stored in her bathtub. And that was played up as showing her pure barbarity. Actually, it was showing that she was still in charge of calling in common force because women distributed the implements of war if there's going to be one. I don't have time to go into the full powers of women's economic rights to Mother Earth, so let me just quickly say that by law, women are the sole keepers of Mother Earth. And that includes not just taking care of Mother Earth, but also includes the sole right of collection and disposal of all the goods and services necessary to life.
Okay. On the fields, all the foods given from men's hunt or the young folks fishing, it all distributes it based on need. And as long as anyone has anything, nobody is ever without. Now, the last big power here is naming. May not sound like much to you. It includes things like naming little babies. These are sacred medicine names too. It includes adoption, which has been crassly misunderstood. Nuclear family adoption, like people think up here. It's granting of citizenship. We're granting full citizenship. The most important part of naming is what Western sources like to call the power of nomination. Okay, and that is a very bad misnomer because it's not nominating. Clan mothers get together and decide who's going to be put in office, and that's it. That person is now in office. That's all it is. There are some caveats. First is a woman, an individual woman cannot name her own children to a position. Okay. Second one is women only have naming rights within their own clan lineage. Okay. Both of these are widely misunderstood by Western commentators. First of all, because Westerners get confused by the diction. You know, the offices are spoken of as being inherited, so they automatically assume in Western text that that means that it's an oligarchy. No. It's a position in office is inherited in the same way that a congressional district is inherited by the state. You know, states have congressional districts and they jealously guard them and hang on to them. But that doesn't mean that somebody's getting rich out of this. Unless your name is Bush, I guess. Second, clans are a whole lot larger than Western commentators imagine. When they say clan, they think, oh, extended family, the grandchildren, the grandparents, cousins, three aunts and uncles. No. Clans are very large units, thousands of people in cities scattered all over the place. Belong to clans. And back as recently as the 17th century, we used to have cities of 15,000 people. That's a whole lot of people. No one clan mother can personally know all the candidates for an open office. The clan mothers get together and talk over the qualifications of the candidates, specifically because they don't know these individuals. What it is a job application process. The different possible candidates come forward, and the clan mothers decide who gets the job. That's what's happening. Denaming is just as important. Denaming is when we impeach somebody for wrongdoing in office. Women, again, have the sole right to do that, to call people to account. Okay. This was usually based on a complaint that would come forward, and it wasn't like you could go to a clan mother and say, oh, I impeach him. No. First, there had to be an investigation to see whether or not the charges were warranted, and only if they were determined after a lot of investigation to be warranted was the person warned once, and the person warned 3 times before any action at all could be taken. So obviously, denaming was not giving permission to a little spite fest. That's not what it was about. Crime had to be pretty horrible before somebody got impeached. And by the way, the major crime in traditional times that got impeached was converting to Christianity. These facts of your point are hardly state secrets. Anybody who has looked into the primary sources comes up with this. Okay? And a lot of times you'll hear little information. Oh, the U.S. Constitution also used the Iroquois as the model, and yes, they did. They took certain ideas, such as dispersal of power, so that no one actually held all the power, including the new states on equal footing with the old states, absolute freedoms, impeachments of officials. All these things are pulled up, and rightly for comparison. They are a comparison. I often wonder what the U.S. would look like today, however, if they'd actually followed the Iroquois model, so that only women, acting in close consultation with their constituents, decided who was in office, so that women alone determined the agenda of the nation, so that all female committees investigated charges of wrongdoing, so that women officials only impeached any errant officials, so that women alone held and distributed the goods and services necessary to life, and women alone called out wars. What was it? I think that an awful lot of posturing that constitutes modern politics would wither away. It doesn't surprise me in the least that in world cultures where young men and even adolescent boys are allowed to shush elder women, that you have chaos and war going on. You're welcome. Instead, what will happen is women are not going out to war. Women just don't do that. Grandmothers in particular. And I want to give you one little closing example here of the Iroquois and the Lenape in the middle of the 17th century when Europeans were trying to encourage us to make war on each other. Oh, the only thing you can do, Lebanese, is go and destroy the Iroquois League. So the Lenape grandmothers came and talked to the Iroquois grandmothers, and we sat down together and said, well, this is stupid. Did we raise these children into these magnificent youths and spend so much time worrying about their nurture and their education just so we could send them off to die? No, surely we're smarter than that. What we do here today is going to have really important repercussions, and what we need to do is gain a reputation for wisdom of the Lenapes and tenderness of the Iroquois. And what we're going to do, therefore, is instead of making war, we're going to make peace. And the Lenapes came into the Iroquois League. And that was the conclusion of that one. So I think that it's important for us to remember the model is already there. People are saying, what can we do, what can we do? One of the things you can do is that remember that historical models already exist. And in particular, the great model of the Negotiation. She did not conquer her way to the Constitution. That's not how she managed the Bible. She incorporated former enemies. When a war party came by, she went out to the crossroads and offered them food, even if that war party had been sent to attack her people. And for the entirety of her seminarian life, she stood up to all of the forces of the patriarchy could range against her. So she thereby convinced the people. She didn't order them, she didn't scare them, she just convinced the people that the Clone way was the best way to approach the civics. And people simply walked away from the priests and into her community. It took a century, but the lived example of an open social group that no matter what was happening to us, practiced sharing, equality, and participation, and never and inequality just because something bad was happening to it. That example is what convinced the people. With no one left to listen to him, the priest's threats rang through hollow, and patriarchy just fell by its own weight in the eastern United States.
Thank you so much, Barbara Mann. Now I think we should take 10 minutes for freedom. I'd like to ask you to put only questions and not longer statements. Thanks. Please.
Thank you, that was wonderful. I have a question about the Seneca Falls 1848 date that you gave when the government took the power of the women away. Seneca Falls Declaration must be related to that. Can you talk about that?
Well, sorry, I don't think that other mic was.
You can hear me now? I personally believe that they were related. One of the reasons the U.S. government sought immediately to disempower Iroquois women was because the European settler women said, hey, this is a good idea. And they got together the Seneca Falls Convention and based it very heavily on Iroquois women's power structure. And wouldn't you know it? You know, the U.S. government's just got to civilize us. And civilized us right out of our Constitution. At that point, the people in New York, people in Ohio, the people in New York had been so destroyed by onslaughts of the settlers, strength left to do anything but die, basically.
I'd like to thank you very much for that. It was made this morning about Little Lake in Midland, Ontario. And it was my understanding, I don't inject, so I know that the Iroquois more or less wiped out the Wyandot, the Hurons. Is that
Okay,
correct?
yeah, that's a big rumor that they love to talk about.
I hope I'm incorrect.
Huron is a French word. It's not a Native American word. It's a slur that the French have been throwing at peasants for at least a couple hundred years before they got to the United States or America. And it means pig-haired lout. Okay. The people's name was actually Wendat, and the Wendat are not the people that were engaged in any war. What happened in 1640s was that the French sent out their missionaries to convert people, convert. And some groups of the line, or the Iroquois, the Wyandots didn't even exist at that point. Some groups of the Iroquois at that point decided that they were safer converting to Christianity because they didn't understand what conversion was. They thought it was the same thing as adoption. And when we adopt somebody, they are now a citizen of the league and you've got full rights and benefits of being a citizen. So they thought that by converting that they were getting full rights as French citizens. And we thought so too. We thought so too. The French suddenly made a very, very underhanded set of attacks on the Iroquois, and so there was a war begun. In fact, they started by wiping out the entire Men's Grand Council and didn't even know that there was a replica in the women's half of the league, and so the Jingosha of that period, and she, by the way, beat the French entirely, and got some of the men back that had been taken prisoner for galley slaves. Now, the people that were made war on in the 1640s at that time were not, in our minds, any longer citizens of European conversion. And as far as we're concerned, they were not French. Okay? So that if you come and you get your citizenship as an American citizen, an American attacks Iraq, and you happen to be a former Iraqi national and you're over there in an American uniform, you're going to get shot at. You're going to get shot at. And so that's what happened. But the French and later Western commentators, partly because they didn't understand what adoption was in our minds, and partly just because they wanted to play the Iroquois League up as brave savages that needed to be kicked out of New York and all those further places, started this rumor about the hideous savages back on the Iroquois. In fact, by the way, people we took prisoner, we didn't kill, and we adopted them into the League, which is how we got the next sitting Jingosha. She came from those people.
Amico, and I think that the Iroquois model is probably one that we could begin to start using. I've thought about it a lot for a couple of years now, and I'm wondering if you have thought about how we could practically start using that model now.
Yeah, I've long been impressed by Genevieve Vaughn's gifting projects. I noticed what she was doing in the early 1980s, and I was very impressed by what she was doing. And I think that probably it needs to be that sort of approachment. I don't think that you can convince people by talking. They have to look and see that you're doing something that they want a piece of, which is how the Cornway was put in place. I don't think you can do it just by changing the actors or saying we're having a different economy. All you're going to do is have the same mindsets of oppression, and the result will be tokens and toadies, think Condoleezza Rice, and nothing is going to change. So there needs to be that steady, ongoing example.
One last question now.
Yes, I just want to thank you, Barbara Mann, for all your work. You just made such an important contribution to moving the new history forward that really synthesizes the indigenous perspective, that looks at women integrally in multi-levels, not just politics, not just culture, not separating politics, culture, religion, and all of that. And the question I'd like to ask you relates back to this question when you're talking about the wine wars that were instigated by the French, the Jesuits coming in. I wanted to expand it a little bit because I really like to hear your perspective since you know so much about the Eastern nations. I'd like to know if you have anything to say also about the Innu and Naskapi nation, where there's the book Chain Her by One Foot that talks about the Jesuit patriarchalization of the Great Lakes peoples that they colonized. And if you could tell us a little bit about anything you know about that.
Well, I know a lot. I think the idea is to get to lunch here at some point. The most egregious damage that was done to the Iroquois League was done not so much by the armies, because that's easy to recognize an enemy, but by the missionaries. And The people that went in and accepted missionary lifestyles and accepted conversion were immediately office, and they were considered no longer members of the Iroquois League. So that I'm not quite sure where you want me to wind up the question. Where did you want me to go with that?
Well, I'm just interested in learning a little more about the Innu people and, how they relate, as far as, especially in relation to matrilineal tradition and that direction.
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that clearly and quickly without a degree of thought. I don't like to give fast answers to deep questions. And I would rather just sit around and think about that for a while, which, by the way, is traditional in council. Nobody's expected to rip off an answer very quickly. And sometimes you can be a speaker and then just stop talking for like a day or two. When you come back, you're expected to have slot through and the floor is still yours. And that's the kind of question, that I would like to think about at length rather than pull out a very, very quick answer. It might not be a very quick one. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Barbara. We have now our lunch break and we will continue at 2:30. Thank you so much. Now I would like to